Hello everyone to this very important video. As we know, the tariff wars that Trump unleashed on the world are ongoing despite a bunch of retracements of and retractments of Trump from the initial plan from Liberation Day. So right now we are in a hold of 10% tariffs on everyone until June 9th, 90 days to negotiate with the rest of the world, while China is still suffering from a 125% tariff, 145 if you count the 20% on top of it. And we just heard over the weekend that Trump is now retracting some of these Chinese tariffs and removes it from electronics. As far as I understand right now, it's a very chaotic situation. The Trump update to put a 20% fentanyl tariff on the electronics from China actually means that the real tariffs on electronics from China are now lower than under Biden. Let that sink in. Because under Biden, it was 25% on electronics, and Trump just lowered the tariffs to 20%. Of course, this is temporary, and we don't know what's happening next. At least we don't know it as a fact. In this video, I'm going to go into what happens over the next 90 days and what the most likely prediction is of what is actually happening to the markets so we can do the right thing with our portfolios and our trades. Hey, creating these videos is a lot of work. Please like and subscribe. It really helps out the channel. Now let's get back to the video. So I'm going to share my screen and go through some points that I think will be very helpful for all of us to navigate this very tricky 90 days. So we have turbulence ahead, but I think the 90-day outcome by June 9th can be predicted. July 9th, sorry. So what we see is currently 10% tariffs on most goods, rest of the world, and we are now waiting for what's happening in these negotiations. China also sees a relief. Apple is up a lot today on Monday. And in order to predict this, it's very important to understand the first principles under that Trump operates or has to operate, and the first principles under that China has to operate. So we can reason from these first principles of behavior what the most likely outcome in these tough negotiations will be. Because as you know, I think the rest of the world is less important. The rest of the world will be negotiated with Trump. And the goal here is a potentially 10% or less than 10% tariff on everyone, with the exception of free trade deals between individual regions. Trump's strategic objective is to onshore more manufacturing back to the United States. For that, he needs some tariffs, he thinks. And I think he's serious about it. But these tariffs will be far, far off from the initial Liberation Day tariffs. And I think we are talking 10% or less as a baseline, which is still more than it was before. So the first principles under that Trump has to operate, and we know that by now, is Trump needs strong stock markets. Whatever he says, we have seen him cave a little bit, and there's enormous pressure from the direct environment he operates in, directly on him if stock markets tank, and of course bond markets even more. Neither the US nor China can survive the current situation for long, and with long, I mean 2 weeks max. Because right now, the entire supply chains are on hold. Right now, tens of thousands of US businesses can't do anything. They cannot get their goods from China. And even more impact on the Chinese side, of course, where goods are piling up in the warehouses, people can't go to work. It's a complete Armageddon as we speak. But that also means this cannot be continued for very long on both sides. We also understand that Trump will be reasonable and Trump will operate within reason in economic and business terms and Wall Street terms, because he's surrounded. Think about that. He's surrounded by people like Elon Musk, David Sachs, like Besant and Lutnick, but also Chamath Palihapitiya, Bill Ackman, and a whole range of billionaires, venture capitalists, heavily invested people, and they will not allow this to happen. And the more radical people who understand economics less, like Navarro, already have been sidelined. So we know that the Elon crowd, the David Sachs crowd, Besant, Chamath, Bill Ackman, they have seized more and more control here. And that informs us a little bit about what is likely going to happen. Trump is going to work along these lines. And I think that should give us some some peace of mind in the markets. Hey, if you want to stay ahead of capital markets and the next Tesla moves, join us in Pioneerlands. Here we track Tesla, capital opportunities, AGI disruption, and politics. It's your critical information advantage in the age of AGI. It's free, and the link is in the description. Let's get back to the video. The first principles under that China operates is China is in a weak position. Their economy has already been weakening in their economic growth. So they are not in a position to hold through this for very long, despite what people say. They say Communist Party always has total control. That's not how it works. In fact, there are at least rumors and also some indications that Xi's position in China is weakening. And it's not surprising if a country has problems and it's a dictatorship, then this dictator doesn't have complete control. Same with Putin in Russia. They rely on their inner circle. Xi relies on the CCP supporting him, on the power players in the CCP. There are some complicated power structures in the CCP. And if China is doing less well, which is true over the last 4 years, or last 6 years since the initial Trump tariffs, plus some other factors, but the initial Trump tariffs hit China. So the growth is slowing, and now they have a major problem. So while Trump has the pressure from his inner circle, which is the capitalist, the billionaire class inner circle, Xi has a lot of pressure from the communist CCP circle that wants to maintain power, and there are lots of rivals, and he has to be very cautious, and his position is weakening. And it's what we can also indirectly observe is there is a internal virtue signaling spiral. And virtue signaling in the Chinese Communist Party means you need to signal the virtue of strength, right? Strength means, well, we are strong, we don't have to give in. So it's very important that these negotiations don't look like the US is imposing too much on China, because it makes it impossible to save face, and saving face right now is absolutely crucial for Xi, because otherwise he's undermined internally. And I think Trump understands this more and more. We know that China is under enormous pressure because multiple people came out, multiple leadership people in China came out and used very desperate language. I want to make this very clear. We have repeatedly heard that China is not going to give in, and literally this term was thrown around a lot. We will fight to the end if necessary. That's what China said. Now, why do I think that is a clear signal that there is a major problem in China? Well, imagine you have a neighbor. The neighbor is annoying. The neighbor is the United States. And the neighbor says, you know what? I don't like your look. And I don't like that you are mowing the lawn too much. Next time you mow the lawn without warning me, I want $10 from you. Okay, what are you going to do? You're probably going to say, dude, chill out, right? Whatever. No. Or whatever you're going to say. The one thing that you're not going to say is you're not going to go to him and say, I will never pay you these $10 and I'm willing to fight to the end. Because you're not taking it too seriously. And even if it would be $10 that he can somehow get from you, that doesn't justify language like we are going to fight to the end. But if this neighbor has been cornering you and is suing you and you are out of money, then you're using that language. So the fact that anyone says, I'll be willing to fight to the end just because of a little tariff war means there is a problem. So China is cornered. That doesn't mean the US wins necessarily easily, but it means they're also under huge pressure to do something. It needs to just be done in a way that recognizes the internal power struggle, and that it's more important for Xi than saving China to save himself. So he has to look like strong to his people. In all of that, even though my prediction, you will hear in a second what's going to happen, there is a tail risk, and we should not underestimate this tail risk, and that tail risk is war with Taiwan. I don't think it's likely. It's hard to quantify right now, but that is the bad outcome, the really bad outcome if things go south. It's hard to quantify right now how likely that tail risk is. I would say let's observe that very closely for the next 14 days. Do we see a relaxation of the situation? We see some initial signals. We already saw a huge signal with the electronics exception of Trump. I think we're on a good way to wipe out this tail risk, but we have to be very observant over the next days. So what does the US actually want from China besides the tariffs? Why do they impose these tariffs? What is the demand? What is the ask from China? I will go very quickly through it, not waste too much of your time, but so you have an understanding what the actual ask is that the US actually wants China to do. So The US wants stronger intellectual property protection. Don't steal stuff anymore from US companies. And if Chinese companies do that, they should be able to be held accountable. That's not the case right now. The next issue, enforce technology transfers. Stop these rules that when US companies come into China, that they have to give up their IP and share it with local companies. That is actually currently in place. That's insane. That has to stop. That's the demand. Reduce state subsidies to Chinese industries. A lot of these industries get direct subsidies, including BYD, nearly $2 billion in subsidies directly to BYD, the biggest EV manufacturer in China, just gets money from the government. It's estimated that up to 30%, likely 25% of BYD's profits are just subsidies. Like, think about that. Imagine the US would just increase Ford's or GM's profits by 25% by just giving the money. That would be unfair. The increased market access for US firms, there are a lot of barriers, that the US firms cannot enter China. And of course, currency manipulation, always the big elephant in the room. So these are important demands. And then the most important, maybe fentanyl. That is because Trump promised that in his election, his campaign. So fentanyl has to be dealt with. And China still refuses to do certain things. This is very important. Stricter regulations of precursor chemicals. So there are very narrow types of precursors that are being manufactured in China that are needed for fentanyl. They often go to Mexico, or they're being actually turned into fentanyl in China. And they want to have much stronger restrictions on that. They want enhanced law enforcement cooperation. They want to crack down on money laundering, because there's a lot of stuff going on where fentanyl is shipped to Mexico. Mexico illegally puts it into the United States. And then there is some money laundering going on where the Mexican cartels pay China. And this is all not very good. So this has to stop. And then, of course, end subsidies and tax rebates for precursor exports. So instead of just manufacturing fentanyl at home, China produces all the stuff you need, but not the final product, and then puts subsidies on it and tax rebates. And that is, of course, extremely bad. Now, in order to save face for China, there are also a bunch of demands that China has towards the US. And that's very important, because she cannot look like he's just caving. And it's not enough to just get rid of the Trump tariffs, because Trump made up these tariffs. So you can't go to China, make up the tariffs, force them into submission, and then reduce the tariffs again. That looks like a giant loss for Xi. So Xi wants something more on top. And of course, another big elephant in the room that China wants is easing US technology export controls, for example, on NVIDIA chips. But there are many other things. That is a national security issue, of course. But of course, the US could give in and make it easier for China to access certain export-controlled goods from the United States, which would be good for the economy. National security has to be discussed. So what is the bottom line? We have a clear set of demands that the US wants from China. It's not rocket science. These are very clear things where China could give the US a lot of things. We also have some things that China wants from the US. To save face, the US could say, okay, we lighten export controls, we reduce export controls and give you that, and you give us ABC. We take down the tariffs to whatever, 25% again. Everyone is happy and we have a win. We also know that we have pressure on both sides that is exponentially building with every single day. Trump already gave in. China is going to give in my opinion. So what does it all mean? I think for us, for anyone who's in the market who wants to make decisions, there is an enormous likelihood that, in my opinion, that this will be resolved very soon. I said it in the beginning. Now it's even more clear how it's going to be resolved. And it gives us a good macro timeline to work with. Very likely, there needs to be very positive signals over the next 14 days, maybe much earlier, maybe this week, where we see movement. I think the deals will be struck way before the 90 days. In May and June, see more and more resolutions for that. And once the market sees a good deal is on the way and all points are being discussed between China and the United States, I think the market forgets about the whole thing. So I think that is what's happening right now. There will be volatility because any little news will still make the markets nervous. But I think the big shock of the Liberation Day was people had no idea what Trump wants, these crazy tariffs being put on the world. and no one knew, is this a negotiation strategy or does he mean it? Is that the end? And I think for Trump, whatever his reasoning was, I think it's very clear by now that he is getting advice from people who are on Wall Street and in Silicon Valley, also people who have a lot of investments in all kinds of small and mid-sized businesses and startups, who tell him this is not feasible. These tariffs need to come down. They need to come down very, very quickly. They're already down, at least for China. And the Chinese electronics actually make up roughly 30% of the entire exports of China to the United States. So already 30% of value of exports is exempt from that crazy tariff. The rest we will see. So I think for us, what that means is I would put a very high likelihood on the prediction that this is going to go away very soon. Probably in the next 14 days, we get the significant signals and will be fully resolved within these 90 days. I would say it's a 90% chance that this will be fully resolved in the 90 days from a market perspective. And I would even put an 80% chance that the next 2 weeks will see the relevant signals for a resolution that help us to go back into a rally. And you can sense the behavior of the market. The market wants to rally, right? When you look at the reactions, given how much turmoil we actually are in and how much these Trump tariffs irritated everyone, the fact that the market is already getting close to where it started before Liberation Day tells you that the underlying momentum, if you take tariffs, the tariff negotiation were out of this, is extremely bullish. That is what I would read into this behavior of the market. The market went down a lot and it wants to go up a lot. That is my sense here. The tariffs keep it back, but I think the tariffs will be resolved very soon. Now, there's a 10% tail risk that something goes wrong. That is the tail risk of potentially even war with Taiwan. I think it's not likely right now, but that the next 14 days will tell us a lot if we can take that tail risk off the table or if it's getting worse. So from here, next 14 days, very important. You're probably going to miss out on some rallies if you wait the full 14 days, but it's all a probabilistic game. And within 90 days, I think there will be resolution. It also seems to me when I look at the market that the Mag 7, especially Tesla, but also NVIDIA, you saw Apple moving a lot today. I think they're setting up for some really positive, action. And I will go into Tesla specifically in another video later today for the outlook for the week. I think something huge is happening there. But with that, let's conclude the macro outlook here. And I hope to see you very soon.